great places to start is putting power back in the hands of individuals and communities to make decisions for themselves. And I think that's a lot of the kind of work that you've been doing even when you're recording stories and cultures and narratives from communities, to allow them to do that as opposed to coming in and almost leading the conversation.
Right. The only issue sometimes I feel I have with that is then you lose out on the larger vision.
Right.
And unfortunately, the global scenario is such that we need to take fairly harsh, larger decisions about the preservation of the thing. So too much power also in the hand of the individuals might lead to kind of a dilution of the larger vision. So I think that balance, how do you create that balance where you have a larger vision, which is a positive vision, which should work for the benefit of the community and the environment in the long term, but at the same time give the individual the power to make the right decisions. Till now I haven't managed to find that balance. Maybe you have some experience.
I think that is the big challenge of conservation right now, is to give enough voice and agency to the different stakeholders to be able to take decisions that are still based on sound science and what you're talking about, that larger picture issue. Of course, just the fact that we live in a country which has so many different kinds, so many different landscapes, so many different cultures, so much diversity in, through every realm and through every kind of, every step of the way you've got differences and diversity. And I think that's one reason why you can't have generic solutions and you have to look at customizing solutions to different things. If you just look at wilderness, for example, most people will see wilderness as a forest. And if you develop policy for a forest, that's great, but wilderness is also a desert. Wilderness is also a wetland. Wilderness is also a marine protected area, or a coral reef for that matter. And I think, like in my project, for example, in the Mud on Boots project, we identify community leaders across the country who are working on local issues and allow them to lead the dialogue, which we then supplement with what we have access to, which is science and experts who are working on kind of much more technical solutions and might be available to them.
Right. Very similar to your Mud and Boot project. So we did it's an ongoing project on the conservation of lesser florican. And the whole idea again is that you develop the model based on the local environment, and fortunately it's worked very well. There's an economic policy which feeds into the conservation of the grassland, which kind of feeds into the conservation of the bird. But we realize that will only work in that area. And the moment you move ahead and go to the next spot, that model is not going to work. Which is great because it's customized to the thing and you're maximizing the impact. But then taking it forward and then implementing it means that you have to have individuals at every location who has the capacity and the capability to make those decisions on the ground, which will customize the project. And as we all know, everybody is in a sort of transitory phase, regardless of whether you're in the forest department or you're an individual working, or even if you're a person staying over there, because their aspirations keep changing as well. So again, practical issue about implementation. So we know that we need to have a localized formula for it, but then how do you make sure that localized formula is practical enough to be implemented on a national scale?
So what was the kind of basis of the Lesser Florican project? What was the module you were working on?
So the basic idea was that, of course, our objective was to conserve the Lesser Florican by conserving the grassland ecosystem where they come to for their breeding. Now, how do you monetize that? So you make sure, so there is one way that you have the danda and you kind of say, okay, this is the thing, you shouldn't do it. I'll penalize you, but that never works in the long term. And I think even the forest department and the policymakers have realized that sort of aggressive policy does not work. So our idea was that how do you monetize it in such a way so that the individuals in whose fields the thing come, they kind of feel that by preserving it, they are able to get a larger monetary return. So they are not really sold out on the concept of conserving the lesser florican for the larger vision of environmental good. They're looking at it purely from a monetary perspective, which is great as long as your outcome is the same.
But what is that perspective? Like, how are you monetizing that conservation?
Okay. So the process was that luckily the species comes only for a specific period of the month, which also does not clash with their agricultural season. So the whole idea was that if you spot the bird in your field, and they're very easy to spot because they keep jumping from the same place. You get a certain amount of money, and at the end of the season, if there are evidence of nesting of birds or eggshells or something which can be verifiable, you get a larger chunk of money. So together for that period, they're earning more than what they would have earned.
So you're basically
incentivizing the whole thing. And the thing is, it's incentivized over a period of time so that it's just not I'll get that amount of money, but they know that there's a carrot dangling at the end of the season.
I was actually just going to ask, did it come to a point where there was like, false reporting of sightings?
There was false reporting, but it's a very easily verifiable sighting. So it's like if somebody says, it was there yesterday, but you know the behavior from it, you know that it's not going to move around. So you come back. So it's not then today, come back after 2 days.
Right.
If it's there, then he was saying the truth. If it's not there, then he was like
I mean, and at my end, it just won't work. We're looking at a diversity of landscapes, species and cultures which require different interventions and which require different input and strategies. If you look at species, for example, we've got human-elephant conflict across so many states in India, but the issue of conflict is different from state to state. In some areas where the issue is linear alignments, roads, railways, canals, your solution to kind of tackle that is very different from an area where your major conflict is crop depredation. So and then you come to the animal itself. The elephant is an extremely intelligent animal. Every time you come up with a way to keep them away from fields, they'll learn to challenge that, and then you have to come up with something new. So you have to be constantly innovating, because the elephants are innovating too. So therefore a strategy that works in one state and works for a certain period of time may not be as effective in another state. I don't think there's any silver bullet to conservation. I believe that every issue requires nuanced and very well thought out strategizing with input from stakeholders from the grassroots level to the very high up academic level. And I think that's the only way it's going to work.
But then based on your experience, so at one level you really have to deal with the hardcore policymakers in the Forest Department, Ministry of Environment, and at the same time you have to deal with the individuals of it. So how do you, so when you go and you have an experience of working in the different on the same subject in different environments which have different challenges.
Right.
So how do you, as an individual who's kind of seeing the global picture, how do you manage to create a local level solution, but at the same time convince the larger body who are kind of entrenched into a generic solution to adapt that local? What kind of challenges do you... So for example, at the end of the day, you'll still have to go and meet a guy, IFS officer, who's passed out from that school of thought.
Yes.
And he knows that he'll probably be shifted somewhere else and sort of thing. So he's not going to change his school of thought in a great way just because he's in that location. So what kind of challenges do you face in convincing the local model to the guys who are entrenched in the generic model?
I mean, that's literally the challenge in itself. But I do find that when you're empowering community leaders and giving them access to resources and information that they might previously not have had access to, they're able to be much more effective. For example, on the outskirts of the Pake Tiger Reserve in Sijosa, we have a project leader called Takam Nabam. Takam Nabam is a member of the Nishi tribe, and he's a village elder. There's a council of elders there called the Ghorab Society. Thanks to the work of multiple different organizations and individual conservation biologists, Sijosa in itself is a very conservation-friendly township. And Takam Nabamji has therefore become very sensitive to the issues surrounding conservation and the environment. And recently, he at a state board for wildlife meeting proposed that compensation for human-wildlife conflict be increased. And because of his kind of standing in society, that proposal was pushed forward and accepted. So I think being able to enable community leaders to be able to hear their voices and marry that with what we know, what we're working with in our headquarters and offices, where we're talking to scientists and biologists and policymakers, I think that marriage is essential. Just communications in general, and also like this huge lack of awareness about the planet we live on. It's massive. I mean, you go to any school in an urban center and you ask a kid to name 35 different brands or identify 35 different brands from their logos, they'll do it like that. And you ask them to name 35 different birds that they find in their city, they can't do it. So how are you meeting that?
Again, there are multiple ways of doing it, but then again, based on our Florican experience, if I go back to it, we kind of, our interaction level is based on multiple levels. So of course, you're working with the forest department at a policy level because they're the one who will be monitoring and doing everything. But we also work in the environmental education level. So part of the project is that we're working with close to 5,000 and above school children in the primary school thing, and various levels of interaction over there, from presentation to sort of thing. Just one small product, for example, we made this series of comic books where we kind of created this ideal family and how the boy of the family kind of through the rewards that he gets from the lesser Florican sort of thing kind of helps the family certain thing. But it's just not a book because you're creating a scenario and there's a daughter and there's a wife, and then you're talking about child education as well because in the next set there's child education, about women and livelihood, about men and livelihood, about children's education. It was formed in a comic book character format because of the lower literacy level. Plus also the idea was that they could customize it themselves. So there are events of coloring it, there are events of putting things in it. So each book is a customized. So it is also on analysis of the book, it is also about the aspiration of the child who it's been given to. That is at one level. Then we created this whole set of thing about young rangers. So kids who were really excited by it, they were given honorary title by the forest department and they became part of the thing. So that's at the children level, but that's the future sort of thing, because you're looking at your 15 years down the line when they're making the decisions, you have a sensitive core group. More for the instantaneous things, and then you interact with the farmers, you interact with the local policymakers, you'll interact with the politicians, you interact with them. That happens at various levels. At panchayat meeting, you create communication methods, you create music videos, like we created music videos for the local thing and the local everybody. So you kind of create this buzz, and it's like a Bollywood style music video for the lesser Florican kind of thing.
And it's interesting because you have to take so many innovative approaches. I have a friend who works in Maharashtra in the Umred Wildlife Sanctuary. In and around that area. Umred itself was declared as wildlife sanctuary just about in 2012, I think. And it really shot up the tourism popularity charts because of this massive tiger called Jay who lived there with a harem of 5 tigresses. And for Rohit, what he wanted to do was he wanted to encourage the communities to see tourism, wildlife tourism, as an opportunity and stop seeing wildlife and tigers as their enemy. So there's a ceremony there called Pola. The Pola ceremony is when the village communities worship their buffaloes and their bullocks as being their Annadata, that which sustains them. And he created the concept of Tiger Pola, and he through his communications with different villagers, convinced them that now you need to see the tiger as your Annadata because tourism is going to bring these certain benefits to your communities, give your kids certain kinds of jobs. You're no longer going to be, and we're talking Maharashtra region, which is so susceptible to drought, where farmlands have been failing for years, where farmers have been killing themselves. And it was incredible because that first Tiger Pola ceremony that he held, hundreds of kids came out dressed as tigers. They had a life-size model of a tigress over there called Chandi that was worshipped. And I just thought it was such an innovative approach to allow communities to kind of feel sweeter towards conservation as opposed to this very antagonistic approach that has been fostered because of different policies and because of the kind of tactless way in which a lot of government bodies and not-for-profit bodies have alienated them from their own lands.
See, I think both of us agree to the fact that it's a very demanding sort of lifestyle. It's demanding not just physically but
emotionally
mentally.
Exhausting.
It's very emotionally exhausting. But then the reason, and I think I can speak for almost everybody who's working, the reason we stick on to this sort of thing is because every once in a while there's this instance of amazingness that kind of gives you that kick sort of thing. So one of the, I think, crazy incidents that I had was we were shooting a film on leopards, and we had made a machan and with the forest department. So there was a leopard who used to come at the watering hole, and we were waiting over there. So we waited for a couple of days, and we didn't see the leopard at all. And the forest department guy was also very concerned why we're not seeing the leopard. So one night we were waiting when suddenly we hear this kind of a sniffling noise on the branch above our head, and everybody freezes because you know that the sniffling is coming from. Luckily, it was towards the end of the night, so after a couple of hours, daybreak happened, and when we turned our back, we found that on the branch, so we're sitting on this level and there's another branch on top. So we thought we were watching the leopard was actually watching us for the 3 days that we were sitting over there. So that just shows that you are not the master of the universe. You are just master of your own little space that you make comfortable in. And in the jungle, you just have to live by the laws of the jungle.
Wow. So, there's this really beautiful... Have you ever read an author called Peter Matheson?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you read The Snow Leopard?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's this quote in there which says, "Transcendence will be fleeting." And it's one of my favorite quotes because I think it really describes what wildlife conservation is to me, which is that every day feels really full of obstacles and bad news and nothing good seems to be happening. And then there'll be these moments in my life, usually in some stunning wilderness area, where I've reached this moment of bliss and this transcendence which will last maybe 3 minutes. But that feeling kind of fuels me to keep working and to understand that I might not be making a big difference, but I got to do what I got to do. And so in December, I was in Orissa. I was shooting a video for the Giant Refugees campaign, which focuses on human-elephant conflict on the outskirts of Bhubaneswar. We had just finished shooting for the day. We'd spent 3 hours in a mob of 300 men who were harassing and chasing a herd of 22 elephants. It was extremely violent. A lot of the men were very drunk. It was a very dangerous situation. The elephants were mock charging us. We were on foot. We had our equipment. It was one of those days which was emotionally exhausting. I was 5 minutes away from bursting into tears, having seen these animals treated this way. And the sun had just about set. The herd had finally managed to cross the path they were hoping to cross for the past 3 hours. The mob had dissipated, and it was just the 5-6 of us and the elephant conflict mitigation squad, and we were putting our equipment away. And I was standing on that path, and I looked into the stand of trees over here, and I saw something glinting. And I just stopped and I kept staring, and suddenly I realized there were 2 young bull elephants, and it was their tusks gleaming. And just very quietly and softly, they just crossed the road and moved over to the other side. And I think that kind of seeing the grace of an animal that's been so persecuted for me was extremely, extremely inspiring. I feel like everything I want to be in life, I learned from elephants. And so I feel like that moment was a moment of understanding for me.